Well, hello Internet, and welcome to part 5 of my Learn to Program series. In this part of the tutorial, we're going to cover pretty much everything you'd want to know about functions and using functions, and I'll clear up a whole bunch of things with them. If you haven't watched the previous parts of the tutorial, you pretty much have to, and I provide a link in the description just so you can understand everything that's going on, because these tutorials are going to build upon each other. And of course, the goal here is to learn Python, but also to learn how to solve problems. And as well, all of the code as well as a transcript of the video is available in the description, and I have a lot to do, so let's get into it. Okay, so here we are inside of PyCharm once again, and I decided to keep the dark background because you guys told me you liked it. Alright, so functions are going to allow us to reuse code so that we don't have to type out everything and write a bunch of duplicate code like we did in the last part of the tutorial. And as you're going to see, writing or creating functions is also going to make your code easier to understand, and that is a major goal whenever you're programming. So to create a function, you're going to type in def or define, and then you're going to follow that with the function name. So let's just call this add numbers. Then you're going to have parentheses, and then you're going to have a comma separated list of values to pass into this function, or that are expected to be passed into this function, and I'm just going to call them num1 and num2. Then you're going to have a colon. Then you're going to have a return value. You don't have to have a return value, but just understand if you don't have a return value and you try to print the results of a function, you're always going to get the answer of none, as we'll get a little bit more into here in a little bit. Now what we're going to do is we are just going to return these two numbers added together. So there's num1 and num2. And now we can call our function, so we could do something like print 5 plus 4 is equal to, and then follow that up by calling for our function to go and add these values for us, and then 5 and 4 separated with a comma, and if we run it, you're going to see 5 plus 4 is equal to 9. So that's a pretty simple function. Now we're going to get into something that confuses people about functions, and that is what are referred to as local variables. Now, any variable defined inside of a function is available only in that function, and I'm going to show you a whole bunch of examples here so that you will get it. So let's create another function, and let's call this assign name. So we'll go assign name like this, and this is going to create an error, and then we'll explain the error and you'll understand what's going on. So what this function is just simply going to do is it didn't receive any attributes, and what it's going to do is create a local variable. That's what it is. It's inside of the function, and then we're going to assign a value of Doug to our local variable. Now we can go outside of here and call for assign name to run, and you would think that it would assign the value of Doug to name, but as you're going to see, if I go in here and try to run it, you are going to get a name error. And if we look specifically at it, you're going to see that name is not defined. That means that name is not defined outside of the function. That's what the error means. Okay, so it's very well aware that anything created inside the function is not available outside of the function, at least in this form. Another thing that's important to know is that a global variable, even if it is passed into a function, is not necessarily going to change the value outside of it. Now, a global variable is a variable that is created outside of any function. So what we're going to do here, just to demonstrate this, is we'll create another function, and we will call it change name. And inside of here, let's say we pass in name, and then we try to change the value of name. We then come out of the function, and we are going to create name. This is a global variable. It's outside of any function, so that makes it global. And we're going to assign the value of Tom to it. What we're going to do now is we are going to call change name, and we are going to pass name inside of it. And you would think that that would change the name for it. Well, we'll find out if it does. And if we run this, you're going to see that Tom comes back. See, we created here name and gave it the value of Tom, and even though inside of our function we tried to change the name to Mark, it did not work. So we're going to get into ways we can solve this. One way that you can change the value is to simply pass the value back. So let's just leave this be change name once again, and we can come in here and this time say return Mark, and then have name be equal to Tom right like this, and then we could come down inside of it and go name is equal to change name, and then try to run it, and now you can see that the name was actually changed to Mark. Okay, so there's one way to do it. There's other ways as well. let's go and let's create a global. Let's call this global name so that we know that it is a global variable. And let's give it the value of Sally. Now inside of change name, let's not even have it receive anything. So it doesn't even receive, nothing's passed inside of it. And then we want to refer to the global version of global name. We can do that just by putting global in front of it like that. And then we can come in and go global name is equal to Sammy. And then come down inside of here, delete all this stuff, and call for change name to execute. And then down in the print area, we will call global name. And if we run that, you can now see that Sammy is there. And if we also, you see here that we're saying inside of our function, we want to use the global version of GBL name inside of our function, and that gives us permission to go in and be able to change it. I talked about previously if we went and created a function and we didn't have a return value that it would return none. Let's come in and demonstrate that as well. So we'll create a function here called getSum, and we will have it pass number 1 and number 2 inside of it. We will then create sum num1 plus num2 inside of that function. And then we will come down here and try to print the results. So we'll just say get sum, and then inside of it we'll pass 5 and 4. And if we run it, you can see right here that we get a value of none passed inside of it. So just some things to be aware of when we're working with functions. And now we come to our very first problem. What I want you to do here is solve for x. And by that, I mean that we want to make a function that's going to receive an algebraic equation, something like x plus 4 is equal to 9. And to be able to solve this problem, you're going to have watched the previous parts of the tutorial, because I'm going to be using some tools that I covered back then. Now, some rules that we're going to have for our little problem here is that x will always be the first value received, and you only will deal with addition. So basically, we know that we're always going to get input based off of this. It's going to have this exact format, and we could deal with solving algebraic equations in which they didn't have this strict format, but I'm going to do it this way just to keep everything simple and keep this problem a little bit simpler. So you could jump in there and try to create that. Otherwise, I'm going to give you a couple hints here. So basically what I want you to do is I want you to create a function, and it is going to receive the string meaning this algebraic equation right here, and split the string into variables, and I showed you how to do that in previous parts of the tutorial. Then inside of our function, we're going to have to convert the strings into ints, just the numbers, that is. And then we're going to convert the result into a string and join or concatenate it to the string. It's going to say something like x is equal to, and then whatever the value of x is. And then outside of our function, we're going to have a print statement that is going to call for our function to execute. All right, so pause the video, try to solve this problem. Otherwise, I'm going to show you how to solve it right now. Okay, so basically what we're going to do is we are going to come inside of here and we are going to create a function, and I'm going to call this solve equation, and it is going to receive the equation inside of it. We are then going to break this out or split out the string into these multiple different variables that we have here. I talked about this in previous parts of the tutorial. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the equation, which is a string, and we're going to split it out into all of these different variables that we have inside of here. A shortcut way that we can come in and convert or cast multiple strings into integers is to go like this, and num1 and num2. So that's something that's a little bit new, and I'm kind of guessing you didn't do that. That's okay. Just want to use this as an excuse to come in here and show you different ways of doing things. Then we want to convert our result into a string and join it with x is equal to. So make sure we have our white space here corrected. Let's go and tab that in there like that. All right, let's get rid of it altogether. It's a little bit long. So we're going to convert this, and we're going to return our value, and it's just going to be x is equal to, and then after that we'll put plus. We're going to have to convert our result back into a string, and then we'll go number 2 minus number 1. Then outside of our function down here, we can just simply go print and solve equation, and then we will pass our equation inside of it. So we'll go x plus 4 is equal to 9, and if we run that, you'll see our result comes back as x is equal to 5. Okay, so if you want some additional homework, you can come in here and figure out how to make this work if it is in this format, or if it is maybe a subtraction, multiplication, division. You have all the knowledge already from the previous parts of the tutorial to be able to handle that, and also come in here and figure out how to make it work where you have 4 plus x is equal to 9. I think those all would be really good homework problems. Once again, if you didn't get it right, don't worry about it. The whole goal here is just to introduce you to a bunch of problems and how to solve them, and after a while you'll be able to do it. Alright, so now what I want to do is talk about how do we return multiple values. Well, let's go and create a function here. So we'll say something like multiple divide is the name of our function, and I'm going to have num1 and num2 inside of here. And if I want to return multiple different values, all I have to do is put those values inside of return separated with a comma. So we could just go num1 and then multiply that times num2 and then separate that with a comma. Make sure that you have multiply there, not an 8. And then inside here we'll also go num1 divided by num2. Alright, now you have to watch out here that this isn't a 0 because that'll throw an error, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So what this function is going to do is it's going to return both the multiplication of these two values and the division of those two values. So we could then receive multiple values here by just coming in and putting commas between those two guys, and then call for our function to run on itself, and then pass in our two values, and then we could of course come down here and print out our results as well, and then just throw a mult inside of there, and then do exactly the same thing here thereafter with divide. So divide and divide, and if we run it, you'll see that indeed that did work for us as well. So that's how we return multiple different values. Maybe you'd also like to know how to return a list, and in this situation, why don't we do something a little bit neater? I'm going to come in here and return a list of primes. But first, before I do that, let's think about how we would come in and solve that so that we can return a list of primes. Now, of course, we know that a prime can only be divided by 1 and itself. So, for example, if you have 5, which is a prime, the reason why it is a prime is because whenever you divide it by 1 and 5, those are the only situations in which you receive a positive factor. And that just means that there is no remainder from the division. 6 is not prime, of course. And the reason why is you can divide 6 by 1, 2, and 3, as well as itself. So knowing that knowledge, let's think about how we'll solve this. Basically what we want to do here is we're going to receive a request for primes up to an input value. So we're going to ask the user to type in the maximum prime that we want to search for. And then what we're going to do, so we'll just say input max prime that we're going to search up to. Then what we're going to do is use a for loop and check if modulus is equal to 0 if there is a situation in which we are searching for anything other than 1 or the value itself, and we come back with a true statement whenever we use modulus on that function. Remember, modulus returns the remainder of a division. If it comes back as 0, that means the division worked. So what we're going to do is check for that, and that's basically all the information that I need. So what I want to do is I want to break this down into parts, because it's always better to have more functions, or it's almost always better to have more small functions rather than great big giant long functions. So I'm going to create a function here called isPrime, and it's going to receive a number, and it's just going to find out, even though what we're doing here is searching for a list of primes, I want to break this down so I check each individual number by itself, and that's what isPrime is going to do. And you can make this uppercase if you'd like, or you could come in here and put a space inside of here, or do whatever you want. Okay, so I'm going to go in there and do that. So the very first thing I'm going to have to do is create a for loop that's going to cycle through primes from 2 to the value that we want to check. So I'll just say for I in range, and then the range, we know that we don't have to check for 1 because that's going to come back positive for everything because everything's divisible by 1. So we're going to put 2 inside of there instead. And I'm not going to make this the greatest prime number calculator because actually we don't need to calculate the whole way up to the max value. I'm just going to keep it simple here right now though. That could be homework if you wanted to optimize this to find primes quicker, go for it. But I just want to keep it simple. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to check if any division has no remainder. If that comes back as positive, then we know that this number isn't a prime. So what we have to do is just come in and say if num and modulus I is equal to 0 in any situation, well then we are going to return false as an answer. If, however, we cycle through our entire for loop and we never get an answer for false, actually false is going to throw us out of the program altogether, well then we know that it's true, that we do have a prime number. Alright, so I got this. This guy's going to handle checking each of the primes. Now what I need to do is create a function that is going to deal with getting a prime number list. So I'm going to go call this get primes like this. And it's going to receive a maximum number up to which we are going to check for prime numbers. I am then going to create a list, which once again is just an indexed number of pieces of data. So it's going to start off just like strings. It's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then each one of those boxes is going to contain something. In this situation, that something is going to be a prime number. So we'll call this list of primes. In the next part of the tutorial, I'll get more into lists. And how we create a list is by saying, hey, we want a box of stuff, and that's how we create a list. Now what I'm going to do is create a for loop that's going to cycle through all of the primes from 2 to the maximum value requested. So I'm going to go for, and I'll call this num1 in range, and we'll cycle from 2 through the max number that we want to deal with inside of here. And then it's going to be real easy to check if this is a prime number or not. So we're just going to go isPrime like that, and we will pass in number 1 that we're going to be checking for. And then if that comes back as true, then we're going to say list of primes. And if you want to add an additional item into our boxes of boxes, which are lists, you just call append and then pass in whatever you want to be passed inside of there. Alright, so now that we have all of that all set up, we can come in and we cycled through every single item or prime and we created our list of primes, and then we can come in and pass back our list of primes. So now what we're going to do, outside of any of our different functions, we are going to ask the user to enter the maximum. This is kind of a wordy function, but whatever. I'm going to come in here and ask them what is the maximum prime you want us to search for. And I'm going to use input for this, and I'll just say something like search for primes up to, and we'll get that. And then I can come in and go list of primes, and then we can call our function get primes, and then pass inside of it the maximum number that we want to check for. Then after we do that, if I want to print out every single prime number from a list, I can go for prime in, and then what I want to search for, which is the list of primes. That is the list we're dealing with. And then I can come in and print out each individual prime number and run it. Alright, so let's test this, see if it works. Search for primes up to, and we can try 100. And there you can see it automatically went in there and shot out all the prime numbers. And we can come in and do even more, 1000. And you can see how quickly it went through and calculated all that. So that's quite neat. Alright, so there you go. That is how we can deal with primes. And so just dealing with some functions in Python in general. Another thing that is great to know is how do we deal in a situation in which we have an unknown number of arguments being passed into our functions. So what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to receive an unknown number of arguments using what is called the splat operator. So let's create a function and we'll call it SumAll. And since we don't know how many items we're going to get, we're going to put the splat inside of here. That's what this is, splat. And it's going to be able to deal with it for us. So let's say we want to add an unknown number of arguments together. We'll create sum, which is going to have our final amount. And then we can cycle through all of those different items inside of there by just putting args. You don't put the splat in front of there, just put args like that. And then we can come in and increment the value based off of I. And again, make sure outside of the for loop, we then come in and go return sum. And then we can come in and print all of this. So we can say sum and then call sum all and then pass in as many values as you'd like. It doesn't matter, and it's automatically going to work for us, as you can see right there. So that is the basics of functions. Now what I'm going to do is go and create a much larger little program and demonstrate more in which we can do with functions inside of Python. Okay, for our next example, we're going to use the math function. What I want to do here is create a program that's going to allow us to go and calculate area for multiple different shapes. And I'm going to use the math function for this. And something else you may, if you're acquainted at all with Python, you might be wondering, why have I not used the main function? Well, you don't technically need to use the main function, but very often we place our main programming logic in a function called main. And it's going to be created exactly like this. We just go define and main like that, and then you're going to put your colon, and there you go. There's your main function. If you want to run this main function automatically when the program is executed, you then type main at the very bottom here, and main is going to run. And the reason why is everything else is going to be in functions, and this is going to be, and they're going to be ignored. The functions are going to be ignored unless they're called, of course. And here, this is going to be the only thing that is going to be able to execute for us. So what we're going to do here, like I said, is we're going to calculate area using multiple different functions. And specifically, I am going to go and calculate area for both rectangles as well as circles. And if you wanted to do this without functions, you'd have to create a giant list of ifs and elifs and things like that, which are just terrible. In this situation, our goal here is to have main only have this code inside of it. Basically, we're going to ask the user what type of shape they want to use. So I'm going to go input, and I'm going to say get area for what shape. Then I want to call a function that will route to our correct function that's going to handle actually calculating the area. And I'll call this one get area. And we're going to pass shape type into that guy. And I think that's enough. So what's better, to have a whole bunch of ifs and elifs and things like that, or to have two very easy to understand pieces of code here that are going to go and calculate the area? The only problem is I have to go and create get area. So let's go up here and outside of main, and let's create those functions. Now basically get area is just going to act as a router to another function that is actually going to generate the areas for different types of shapes. So we'll just go and we'll call this get area, and of course it is going to get a shape passed into it. And you can think about exactly what's going to happen here. You could go ahead and try to calculate this on your own, pause the screen or whatever. Otherwise, I'm going to show you exactly what I'm going to do here. Very first thing I want to do is I want to switch shape to lowercase so that I don't have to check for lowercase and uppercase versions of whatever this string is that they passed inside here. So I'll just call lower. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to say if shape is equal to rectangle. Well, in that situation, I am going to call a function that is going to be called rectangle area. And otherwise, make sure that I have my white space here, right? No, I don't. See? Make sure that's all set up correct. There we are. Let's go and tab that in, tab that in. Otherwise, I'm going to go elif and check for shape is equal to circle. And if it is, then I'm going to call a function that I haven't created yet called circle area. And then you should always come in there and have a default in the situation in which they don't enter rectangle or circle. And I'm going to handle that situation by just typing in, please enter rectangle or circle. All right, so that's all that function is going to do. Again, it's very easy to understand what's going on because everything is just a couple lines of code and it's nice and neat. That's another benefit of functions. Keep these code blocks as small as humanly possible. Now what I need to do is create a function that's going to calculate my rectangular area, and we already know what it's going to be called. It's going to be called rectangle area, and it doesn't receive anything. Put a colon inside of there. Now what's it going to need to do? Well, it's going to need to use or ask the user what is the length of this. And I'm going to convert this into a float because I don't know what I'm going to be dealing with, integers or floats. And I'm going to ask for input here. And I'll just say enter the length. And then I'm also going to have to get the width. So we'll come in here and change this to width. And we'll say enter the width. I'm not sure why it went and did that silly stuff. And then, of course, it's going to have to print out a result. Well, why don't we keep everything all nice and neat, all on separate lines. Sometimes it makes more sense to go and have multiple different lines if it makes the code easier to understand. And here I'm just going to go length times width to calculate that area. And then we will come in and print out this information. So we'll say the area of the rectangle is, and then we will print out whatever the area is. And now we're going to use a very similar type of test here whenever we are calculating the circle. So we're going to go define, and what are we going to use? We're going to use circle area here in this situation. So let's copy that, create that function, same sort of format except with the circle. We're going to need the radius, and we want to be able to accept floating point values. We'll put it in there like that, and we'll go input, and we'll say enter, well, make sure it's in quotes inside of here. Enter the radius, calculate the area in this situation. This is the reason why I imported math inside of here, is so I could go math pi, and then I'm going to multiply that times, and then I'll call and use the power function and pass inside of it radius and 2, and then we will just output our information in regards to the area for our circle. The area of the circle is, and then we can come in here and decide that we only want to use 2 decimal places. We'll put a colon and a dot and a 2 followed by an F for float, and we're going to use format here, of course, and then we'll just pass area inside of it like that. All right, so everything's in its place. All the code blocks are nice and short, and it's very easy to understand exactly what's going on. And what's even better is it's extensible. We could come in and calculate multiple different shapes just by coming in here and putting more elifs inside of here, and then creating more functions to go and be able to calculate areas for even more functions. And if we come in and run it, whoops, elif the shape, you know what I did wrong here. Elif up here, I forgot to put my colon inside of here. So if you get that invalid syntax, you know what that is. Whoops. And what I do here, enter the length. I was being silly and I forgot to put my quotes inside of here, so let's go and do that. Sometimes when I'm talking and coding, I'm not thinking too good. Everything else looks like it's good, so let's run it. Get area for what shape, and I could come in here and type in circle and enter the radius, and I'll just type in 30, and you can see that that comes back, and it's also formatted to only 2 decimal places because I said that's what I wanted it to do down here with format. And of course we can come in and what shape, and we could do rectangle and enter the length, and I could say something like 3, and then I could enter 4, and 12 comes back as a result. So there you go, guys. That is a rundown of some things you can do with functions and using Python. And for your homework, I'd like you to go in there and add the ability to calculate the area for parallelograms, rhombuses, triangles, and trapezoids, just to give you a little bit more practice. Alright, so just like always, please leave your questions and comments below. Otherwise, till next time.